staffs. As you know, China is a part of our emerging market strategies, which we've been involved since the mid-1990s. And frankly, it's difficult to discuss the emerging risks and uncertainties in the emerging markets without first mentioning some of the events that have happened in Ukraine and Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the significant economic fallout that has taken place since then. So in retaliation for globally coordinated massive sanctions against Russia, its oil and gas industry, transportation industry, central bank, Russia has imposed significant capital constraints in terms of capital outflows out of the country, and on February 25th shut its equity markets. Those markets remain shut to foreign investors like the State Board of Administration as of today. In terms of our exposure to Russian securities, as we reported, the SBA had about $300 million of Russian securities prior to the crisis. In terms of context, that's about 15 basis points. It's $300 million out of $190 billion. It's equivalent to 15 cents out of a $100 bill. That exposure has come down significantly since the crisis in terms of valuations. We remain in constant contact with our managers to make sure that they are staying aware of the situation and the evolving facts and circumstances over there. Our expectation is that our managers will continue to act as fiduciaries and will continue to assess the situation on a facts and circumstances basis as things evolve and continue to manage our investments in the best economic interests of our beneficiaries. I would anticipate, in light of that, that as liquidity comes back into this market, I would expect that under certain situations, some of these managers may choose to exit from some of these positions. I would imagine there may be some managers who choose to hold some of these positions to await possibly more favorable pricing. What I can say is that if we were forced to divest today, under the circumstances, even if we could, again, the markets are closed, the only thing that would do would be to ensure a realized loss for our retirement system benefit, a defined benefit pension plan. And that is an outcome that we are seeking to mitigate by taking a more deliberative approach and making sure that our managers are acting as a fiduciary in the best economic interests of the plan.
And that would violate your fiduciary duty if you liquidated at massive losses for political reasons rather than for the best interest of the beneficiary. Is that how you read your duties?
That's right. Yes, sir.
And I just in terms of the emerging markets, I mean, China, of course, but now with Russia, a typical American that has mutual funds that are invested in emerging markets, would they likely have some type of holdings in countries like Russia and China? Is that pretty typical?
One would expect, again, really up until earlier this month, Russia was included in the emerging market indices, the MSCI, and a number of the major emerging market indices, and you would expect that an emerging market manager would carry Russian exposure in their portfolio as a way to manage their performance relative to the benchmark. So that would be, one would think.
But how you guys have managed this is not atypical from how similar funds would be managed in terms of having exposure to emerging markets and the like?
Well, certainly having exposure to emerging markets, a fund our size and a mandate to diversify globally or to be a diversified global pool of capital is certainly something you would expect for a fund our size to have exposure to emerging markets. And so, as I said, as things stand now, certainly we are staying in constant contact with our managers, ensuring that they continue to assess the situation on a facts and circumstances basis and manage the funds in the best economic interest of our beneficiaries. We will, of course, continue to update the trustees and their staffs as things develop there. In terms of our survey on our holdings in China, as we indicated back in December, the FRS exposure to Chinese securities remained relatively low at 2.8% of the total fund, and that's driven again largely by our holdings in the emerging market space. We discussed back in December increasing risks in China in particular in terms of the government's somewhat erratic responses to certain areas in China, for-profit education, high tech, et cetera. The Chinese property market continues to be under stress. And then in addition to that, we believe that downside risk and uncertainty in emerging markets generally, in China in particular, have certainly increased in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so in light of these increasing risks and uncertainty, for the moment, we have stopped funding new investment strategies in China and in emerging markets, including China, as we continue to assess these risks, determine if there's anything we need to do further. And certainly, as with the Russia situation, this is something that we would ensure to keep the trustees and their staffs informed on as things develop.
Governor, I just have one question. Of the value of the $300 million that we're having conversations on, is there an assessment as of today what the value of that money is?
It's hard. Again, these markets are closed, and in terms of transactions to foreign investors, like the state board, so it's difficult to say what that value is if you don't have active buyers and sellers in the market.
I would just say that in terms of looking at, some of these parts of the world, but particularly like the CCP-linked investments, I know that in the legislature, particularly with the incoming speaker, there's going to be an appetite to look to see if we can, by statute, maybe target our investments away from some of the parts of the world that are hostile to American interest. I'm not sure that you guys could just do that with your fiduciary obligation absent a statutory directive, but I think it would be similar like we've done with BDS, where we put companies on the list, and then that's just the way it goes. So we're going to be looking at that from a statutory perspective, because I think that's the cleanest way to do it, because once that's there, you've got to operate in confines of the law. If you say, well, I'm not going to do CCP, but I am going to do this part or this part, well, there's a lot of problematic countries out there, and so you kind of tie yourself in a pretzel. But if the legislature can speak, I think clearly, I think that would be something that we would welcome here, just to make sure that we're not furthering investments in parts of the world that are not reflective of our interests or values.
And I just have one question. You have a compliance program for assuring that we are complying with federal sanctions, and we've done that.
Yes, ma'am. We have a very active compliance department. We're audited against that compliance process regularly, and very active in sort of pre-trading, post-trading in terms of ensuring compliance with OFAC and all applicable laws.
And certainly the CFO, the governor, and I are charged as fiduciaries working with you. We appreciate your assessment of risk and contemplating how we might act in the future under those fiduciary duties. That is a very serious responsibility. Neither the CFO, the governor, nor I take those lightly. If there were a policy direction from the legislature, the Florida legislature, like there has been in the past, whether that's BDS or Venezuela or what have you, at this moment, are you able, even if there were that policy directive, because of the market restrictions, would you be able at this moment to divest?
You mean in Russia or with respect to China?
With the Russia situation?
Well, currently, as it stands right now, the Russian equity markets are shut to foreign investors like the state board. I think if the question were today, could we transact out of that market? My understanding is no.
I appreciate and thank you for everything you've been putting up with. It's been crazy. But the state's in a better place because of your leadership. When you talk about 0.15 basis points, is that what you said?
It's 15 basis points. This is 0.15%, 15 cents on $100.
So it's because your team's guidance and leadership, our exposure because of what has negatively impacted their economy, we're in a good place still financially. I'm Greek. When Greece collapsed, it did nothing to anybody's economy because Greece doesn't put anything out. In the case of Russia, we've got such limited exposure over there. Is Russia's biggest contribution back to the global economic influence just their fuel supplies to Europe, and is that the biggest concern you have as a risk to our financial health?
Well, I think that's a good point. And it's difficult to sort of sit here today and understand or think about how all of these things may play out. But certainly Russia has been an important supplier of oil and gas to Europe and Eastern Europe, Germany in particular, So, there is some considerable uncertainty around the impact of the disruption there, which may have follow-on repercussions. So,
Still
any better?
hear it.
Somebody said it's the Russians. Was that you find out?
No.
Still hear it. I don't think it's from his mic.
Something that we'd have to wait and see how that develops. But it is certainly a risk that this could have follow-on consequences in terms of the economies in Europe.
Sure. Well, again, thank you for your leadership and your balanced and measured approach.
And I just want to add on to that too, as far as the other uncertainty there, that Russia had announced a couple weeks ago their refusal to export fertilizer or nitrogen also, which is going to have a drastic impact on the cost of food and the production of food, not just here in the state of Florida, but across the country and across the world. That's something certainly that's on our radar, something that we're going to be working through. I did have one follow-up question on some of this dollars. At what point would we be able to assess, or should have been able to assess, when we start seeing even the movement of the troops onto the Ukrainian border? At what point was the market shut down that we were not able to divest?
February 25th.
Okay.
All right, we'll go ahead and item 1.
Thank you, Governor. Item 1 is the approval of the December 2021 meeting minutes.
All right, I move to approve. Is there a second? No objection, the motion carries.
Item 2 is a resolution of the State Board of Administration approving the fiscal sufficiency of an amount not exceeding $58 million. State of Florida, State Board of Education, lottery revenue refunding bonds, series to be determined. Request approval.
All right, I move to approve. Is there a second? Hearing none, no objection, the motion carries. Item 3.
Item 3 is a resolution of the State Board of Administration approving the fiscal sufficiency of an amount not exceeding $30,500,000. State of Florida Department of Environmental Protection Everglades Restoration Revenue Refunding Bonds, series to be determined. Request approval.
Move to approve. Is there a second? Hearing no objection, the motion carries. 4.
Item 4 is a resolution of the State Board of Administration approving the fiscal sufficiency of an amount not exceeding $7 million. State of Florida Board of Governors, Florida State University Research Foundation Incorporated, revenue refunding bonds, series to be determined. Request approval.
I move to approve. Is there a second? Hearing no objection, the motion carries. Next item.
Item 5 is a resolution of the State Board of Administration approving the fiscal sufficiency of an amount not exceeding $10,300,000. State of Florida Board of Governors University System Improvement Revenue Refunding Bonds, series to be determined. Request approval.
I move to approve. Is there a second? Hearing no objection, the motion carries.
Item 6 is a resolution of the State Board of Administration of Florida making the fiscal determination in connection with the issuance of an amount not exceeding $16,510,000 Florida Housing Finance Corporation Multifamily Mortgage Revenue Bonds 2022, series to be designated. Brownsville Transit Village 5, this is in Miami-Dade County. Request approval.
Move to approve. Is there a second? Hearing no objection, the motion carries.
Item 7 is a resolution of the State Board of Administration of Florida making the fiscal determination in connection with the issuance of an amount not exceeding $11,700,000 Florida Housing Finance Corporation Multifamily Mortgage Revenue Bonds 2022 series to be designated. Arbors at Quincy, this is in Gadsden County, Florida.
I move to approve. Is there a second? Hearing no objection, the motion carries.
Item 8 is request approval of a draft letter to the Joint Legislative Auditing Committee affirming the SBA trustees have reviewed and approved the Auditor General's annual financial audit of the Local Government Surplus Funds Trust Fund, Florida Prime, Report 2022-082, and actions taken, if any, to address any impacts. This is a clean, unmodified opinion of the Auditor General with respect to Florida Prime's financial statements. There were no findings or requiring correction by the SBA, so we would request approval.
All right, I move to approve. Is there a second? Hearing no objection, the motion carries. Next item.
Item 9, request approval of draft letters to the Joint Legislative Auditing Committee affirming the SBA trustees have reviewed and approved the monthly Florida Prime summary reports and actions taken, if any, to address any impacts for the third quarter of 2021. There were no impacts or actions taken with respect to these reports, and these reports show that Florida Prime was in compliance with all applicable guidelines. Request approved.
All right, I move to approve. Is there a second? Hearing no objection, the motion carries. Next item.
Request approval of the SBA quarterly reports required by Protecting Florida's Investment Act. The only change here, trustees, was the removal of the company from the Sudan continued examination list. Request approval.
All right, I move to approve. Is there a second? Hearing no objection, the motion carries.
Item 11 is the final item, quarterly reports pursuant to Section 215-44-2E of the Florida statutes. And it includes the reports of our general counsel, inspector general, chief risk and compliance audit, as well as the performance of the various mandates that we manage. Performance has been good for the quarter. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, I move to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Hearing no objection, the motion carries. All right, thank you. Ben Watkins.
Morning, Governor, Cabinet members. Items number 1 is the minutes from the September 21st meeting.
All right, I move to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Any objections? Hearing none, the motion carries.
Item number 2, A through F, are reports of awards on transactions we've executed since the last meeting. 2A is a $16 million credit facility for equipment finances that the CFO's office administers. We manage the solicitation recommended to his office, and he's executed that for equipment purchases for the state. Item 2B is a report of award on a $272.8 million new money issue for Turnpike. The bonds were awarded to the low bidder at a true interest cost of 2.43%. Item 2C is a report of award on $122.7 million of PICO refunding. The refinancing enabled us to reduce the interest rate on outstanding bonds from 3.96% to 1.1%, generating gross debt service savings of $27.8 million, present value savings of $26 million, or 17.1% of the principal amount of the loan. 2D is also a report of award on $159.8 million PICO refunding. The refinancing enabled us to reduce interest rates from 3.59% to 1.09%, generating gross debt service savings of $31.7 million, present value savings of $29.6 million, or 15% of the principal amount of the refunded bonds. 2E is also another PICO refunding, $151.9 million. Again, the refinancing enabled us to reduce the interest rate on outstanding bonds from 3.66% to 1.29%, generating gross debt service savings of $17 million, present value $16.1 million, or 9.3% of the principal amount of the bonds outstanding. And lastly, item 2F, a report of award on $132.7 million DOT right-of-way refunding bonds. The refinancing enabled us to reduce interest rates from 3.27 to 1.59, generating gross debt service savings of $19 million, present value of $16.9 million, or 10.4% of the principal amount of the bonds refunded. Now, on to the authorization. Item 3 is a resolution authorizing the issuance and competitive sale of $58 million of lottery revenue refunding bonds for debt service savings.
All right, I move to approve the item. Is there a second?
Second.
Hearing no objection, the motion carries.
Item 4 is a resolution authorizing the issuance and competitive sale of $30.5 million of Everglades restoration refunding bonds, again for debt service savings.
All right, I move to approve the item. Is there a second?
Second.
Hearing no objection, the motion carries.
Item 5 is a resolution authorizing the issuance and competitive sale of $7 million in refunding bonds for FSU Research Foundation, again for debt service savings.
Move to approve the item. Is there a second?
Second.
Hearing no objection, the motion carries.
And lastly, item 6 is a resolution authorizing the issuance and competitive sale of $10.3 million in university system refunding bonds for debt service savings.
I move to approve the item. Is there a second? Second. Hearing no objection, the motion carries. So you have, over the course of the years, been able to report a lot of action taken to take advantage of low interest rates and save a lot of money. You've done a great job on that. Is it a safe assumption that you will not be appearing as frequently given the direction that things are going with the inflation and interest rates?
That is a very safe assumption and conclusion. So commenting on the market conditionings, thinking about it, we've enjoyed low rates and strong demand for a significant period of time, say over the last decade, what I referred to as a Goldilocks market, because everything was working in our favor. Tremendous demand, limited supply, historically low interest rates. So we've moved aggressively, if you noted, to take advantage of that, obviously, and that's what we've been doing. So when you think about it, you step back and think about what's transpired, how the state has been managed. We've actually reduced debt from $28 billion to $18 billion, say over the last decade or so. So not only have we nearly cut our debt in half, we've executed $16 billion of refinancings of the $18 billion that we've had outstanding, reducing our interest rate, and the aggregate savings on those transactions is nearly $3.5 billion in avoided interest cost. So we're in a tremendous place, having taken advantage of, it sounds corny, but once in a lifetime opportunity, largely as a consequence of federal monetary policy. But then I look at where we are now, there are no free lunches, right? And now we're seeing the other side of that. And I was telling the cabinet aides, even a stopped clock is right twice a day, so I'm finally right, rates are going up, right? I would have expected it, but for the extraordinary measures that the Federal Reserve has taken over the last decade. You've read about it, you know about it, the QE and all they've done in doubling down during the pandemic. Now we're seeing the flip side of that with the highest inflation rate that we've seen in 4 decades. And what's referred to as the pivot. The pivot was really more of a pirouette than a pivot in terms of moving from, pedal to the metal, very loose monetary policy. Now we're going to see the other side of that, which is a restricted monetary policy. To give you a sense of order of magnitude, rates during March, the market's already reacted to the anticipated restricted monetary policy the Fed moved last week, obviously the first time in a long time. But rates have reacted. Say we've gone in a 20-year loan from a 2.25 to 2.75 on an interest rate. So that gives you a sense of order of magnitude, and I expect that to continue. And not only that, we have money flowing out of the municipal market in our space, so no longer do we have new money flowing in, needs to be investment, but fund managers having to liquidate positions in order to fund redemption. So we've got weak demand and rising rates. It's just the other side of the coin. What does that mean for us? Not a lot. Because you can see that we've executed a vast majority of the refinancings that are economically feasible, 16 billion out of $18 billion in debt outstanding. So we're in a great place that way. And we don't have any significant new money issues on the horizon. The money that was, where we are economically, it's enabled the state to make strategic investments in infrastructure because of the way the economy's been managed, staying open, reaping the benefits of that, as well as the federal support has put us in a very unique position to be able to do this on a pay-go basis, both environmental and infrastructure on the education side for schools and higher ed. So from a financial management record reserve, so we're in a great place right now.
So I saw some analysis about kind of the money supply and the Fed, and with the financial crisis, whatever, the QE, obviously it went up, and it may have gone up a little throughout the decade and was higher than it had been the previous decade, but then COVID hits and there's a spike. But then 2021 with the new administration, they printed a lot of money and it just went off the chart. And I just wonder whether, some of these things you say there's going to be consequences, but I wonder if they had not been so aggressive in 2021 in printing this trillions of dollars, if we may have been able to avoid, the severity of the inflation and the rate hikes that we're going to eventually see.
One would hope. And with 2020 hindsight, I think they're way behind the curve and got that part of it wrong, was the stimulative impact of both monetary and fiscal policy. And they missed it. And so we're going to pay the consequence of that in terms of higher interest rates.
Jimmy?
Thank you, Governor. Ben, thanks for everything you've been dealing with. How many years you been doing this now?
Don't make me count. I'm going to embarrass myself. I thought it was a 2-year gig, and here I am 26 years later, and now I'm too old to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up.
Jimmy's turning 50, so he's making everybody admit how old they are.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna try to give you an opportunity to elaborate. You've been watching this 26 years now. What we have seen over the Goldilocks period that you're talking about, if you're comparing us to other big states, elaborate on some of the benefits that we have because of the fiscal disciplines we've had in the state of Florida and how that's benefiting us now, and then maybe expand on the cost of business other states are dealing with because of the creditworthiness issues.
So, when I think about it from a big picture perspective, I think what you see is a state that's been extraordinarily well managed and is well positioned going forward. Sort of the antithesis of what's been done at the federal level and in some of the other large states. And we're an attractive place to be, both from a business standpoint, from a quality of life standpoint. When I think about Illinois and pension liability that will, block out all sunlight. But yet we're in the top quartile, right, in terms of long-term liabilities and what the cost is. Also, long-term fixed cost on the debt side, we're in a much stronger position because of the way we've been managed. And I think you see that with the in-migration. That's our lifeblood, is people migrating to the state, both from the Northeast as well as the Midwest. And you see that at levels that I've only seen during my lifetime. So it's sort of 2004, 5, 6 during the real estate bubble. And you see us in that position currently, but with a much, without the same vulnerability with too much credit. So it just puts us in a position head and shoulders above our peer states because of the way we've been managed conservatively and prudently and well positioned to maintain that going forward.
And I had a question.
Yes.
Just to clarify something that we were talking about as far as the printing of dollars in our country. Can you go through, just so we all know, in 2020, how much money was actually printed from the federal government versus what was actually printed in 2021?
I can't quote you. It's in the trillions. With the Fed's balance sheet has increased to $9 trillion now. So we have both the fiscal stimulus, which Congress passed through the Infrastructure Act, was 1.3 trillion. And then we have money that the increase in the Federal Reserve's balance sheet by virtue of QE, which is nothing more than printing money and pushing it out and buying securities to the tune of $100 billion a month. So they've stepped away from that. So there's no longer increasing at that rate. But we're still not to a policy neutral standpoint yet, which the consensus estimate is 2.5%. We're at 0.5%. So we've got a long way to go to get to even a neutral monetary policy. And the federal government's debt increased to $30 trillion. So that's the amount on the balance sheet outstanding at the federal level. And that's with a T. If you think about billions and then you think about trillions, that's an entirely different universe. And we throw that word around with impunity now, which is a little disturbing. We're the third largest state in the nation, and we've got $18 billion of debt. Think about what it takes to get to $1 trillion, right? 10 billions, 100 billion, 100 billions to gets to $1 trillion. I mean, I lose track of the zeros. It's breathtaking.
It's a lot easier to get there when you have a credit card and there's no constraints. It's a lot easier to be fiscally responsible when you actually have a mandate to balance your budget every year. And so, we do that, and obviously we have a big surplus, as you mentioned, record. But I think it's always easier to charge it on the credit card and allow other people to have to deal with the consequences. And unfortunately, that's what we've seen. Okay, well, great. Well, thank you. We appreciate all you've done. You've made a huge difference. I mean, you've saved the state a lot of money, so thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Board of Trustees of the Internal Improvement Trust Fund, Sean Hamilton.
Good morning, Governor.
It's your first presentation as a confirmed secretary.
Yes, sir.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right.
I appreciate it. Well, I'll bring a robust agenda then to celebrate the occasion. But in the interest of time, though, I would like to offer to combine items 1 through 4 for approval, which consists of minutes and statutory rule mandated reports.
All right, I move to approve items 1 through 4. Is there a second?
Second.
Hearing no objections, the motion carries.
Thank you. Item 5 is consideration of a delegation of authority to the Secretary of Department of Environmental Protection or designee to approve placing perpetual protections on Board of Trustees owned lands when land and our water conservation fund grant money is used. The department recommends approval.
All right, I move to approve the item. Is there a second? Hearing no objection, the motion carries. 6.
Item 6, pursuant to a settlement agreement, the board is asked to select one concerned citizen from the list of candidates provided by the Fish Eating Creek Settlement Agreement Advisory Board. The 2 candidates in alphabetical order are Nancy Dale, PhD, and Margaret England.
All right, I move to appoint Margaret England to the Fish Eating Creek Expanded Corridor Citizen Advisory Board. Is there a second? Any comments or objection? Okay, hearing none, the motion carries.
Item 7 is consideration of an application for modification of a 5-year sovereignty submerged lands lease to extend the lease term to 25 years with an option to renew for an automatic 8 years with BAE Systems Jacksonville Ship Repair LLC for the operation of a commercial docking facility. BAE intends to make considerable upland capital improvements to the current facility, which includes a state-of-the-art ship lift in partnership with Space Florida. In order to effectively operate the ship lift, BAE is requesting ownership of 7,263 square feet of sovereign submerged lands that is adjacent to the uplands. The department staff have been diligently working with the applicant to find suitable replacement lands for the exchange. To support critical project construction timelines and funding for improvements, a specific delegation of authority is requested to authorize the exchange of 7,263 square feet of sovereign submerged land with the applicant for operation of the ship lift. The department recommends approval.
All right, I move to approve the item. Is there a second? Second. Hearing it, are there any objections? Okay, Jimmy seconded. I think we need 3 votes. Ashley, yes? Okay, all right, motion carries.
Thank you. Item 8 is consideration of an application for an after-the-fact lease for 51,154 square feet and the authorization of long-term liveaboards at Harbor Cay Club Incorporated for a private multi-slip docking facility. The marina has been in existence since the 1940s, and a year-round liveaboard activity has taken place at the facility since the 1960s. The applicant has requested to continue the liveaboard activity. The department recommends approval.
All right, do you have a question, Jim?
Yes, sir, and congratulations. Great to see you here. I feel like we've been, are we going to create some inconsistency here on liveaboards? I know in the past when we've taken up this issue, there becomes this very hard line approach. I'm okay with it. You know, y'all have got best practices with pump out stations, a number of good positive solutions that are affecting this. I'm just kind of curious, you know, moving forward, are we going to entertain these ideas? And if so, I'm fine with that. I just want you to elaborate a little bit.
Yes, sir, and you did hit a key point right. Obviously, the environmental safeguards are here, but I think too, that's unique. The historical presence of this activity as documented and as associated with their historical request to be grandfathered, you know, you're talking about a very unique circumstance here. And so you're right, that is a fair concern, but I wouldn't expect that this will open a floodgate for this particular scenario.
Okay.
We would expect those lease provisions that you're speaking of that limits that activity to continue in the majority of these leases.
Fair enough. So, and how long has this one been? 55 years, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Okay, I move to approve the item.
Second.
A second.
Okay, motion carries.
Item 9 is consideration of a request to extend Palm Beach State College's sublease term for an additional 28 years to the year 2073. Palm Beach State College intends to complete capital improvements to the sublease area to include classroom facility and a parking structure. The extended term lease will assist in securing funding for the capital improvements. The department recommends approval.
All right, I move to approve the item. Is there a second?
Second.
No objection, the motion carries.
Item 10 is request for a determination that a private sublease between the City of Pahokee and JPDT Holdings Corporation is not contrary to the public interest, and approval of JPDT's bid to redevelop and operate the sublease premises for profit. The term of the sublease for the restaurant will be for a period of 10 years with an option for 2 5-year renewals. Previously, the Board of Trustees approved several agenda items that contain similar lease provisions and fee structures with the city and their previous provider. The City of Pahokee is designated as a community within the South Central Rural Area of Opportunity. The department recommends approval.
All right, I move to approve the item. Is there a second?
Second.
No objection, the motion carries.
Item 11.
Mayor, I think we got the mayor back there, so welcome. Thank you for coming. Congrats.
Thank you.
Yep.
Item 11 is consideration of an after-the-fact approval of a conveyance from the City of Jacksonville to RD River City Brewery, an approval of a partial release of restriction and a right of revocation, and the acceptance of a deed restriction and right of revocation from the City of Jacksonville. RD River City Brewery plans to redevelop this location in conjunction with St. John's River Park and Friendship Fountain. To ensure no loss of dedicated public use lands, the consideration is a parcel-for-parcel deed restriction with $24,000 cash boot to be deposited into the Internal Improvement Trust Fund. The department recommends approval.
All right, I move to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, hearing no objection, the motion carries.
Item 12 is a termination and exchange of 6,789 square feet of sovereign submerged field lands owned by the Board of Trustees for 6,789 square feet of privately owned submerged lands owned by RSBC Real Estate Company, LLP, is in the public interest. The consideration is a parcel-for-parcel exchange and will effectively align sovereign submerged lands with the lease. The department recommends approval.
I move to approve the item. Is there a second?
Second.
Hearing no objection, the motion carries.
Item 13 is consideration of a request to convey 8.4 acre parcel of non-conservation land owned by the Board of Trustees to the United States Navy NSA Panama City for the base buffering purposes. This parcel, deemed a Tier 1 priority, was acquired and approved by the board in 2017 with funds appropriated for the Department of Economic Opportunities Florida Defense Support Task Force Military Base Protection Program. Under today's consideration, the conveyance will allow NSA Panama City to effectively secure and protect the installation from encroachment and manage the property appropriately. A deed restriction inverter in favor of the board will be recorded for base buffering purposes only. The department recommends approval.
All right, I move to approve the item. Is there a second?
Second.
Hearing no objection, the motion carries.
Item 14 is consideration of 2 option agreements to acquire conservation easements over the combined 354 acres within the Lake Wales Ridge Ecosystem Florida Federal Project from Douglas Miller Sr. and Douglas Miller Jr. for $1,469,100. Acquiring less than fee protection of the subject property will provide a valuable buffer to Highlands Hammock State Park by permanently limiting development. Both parcels are within the wildlife corridor of the Florida Ecological Greenways Network. The conservation easement will be monitored by DEP's Office of Environmental Services. The department recommends approval.
All right, I move to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay, the motion, no objection, the motion carries.
Although I will note, it was Douglas Miller and Catherine Miller, and Douglas Miller Jr. and Sarah Miller. Not just senior and junior.
Gotcha.
Women's History Month and all.
Thank you. Item 15 is a consideration of an option agreement to acquire a conservation easement over 4,132 acres within the Red Hills Conservation Florida Federal Project and Jim Land Company for $4,675,000. With approximately 3 miles of shoreline on Lake Miccosukee, the conservation easement will provide protection of water supply for current and future needs of natural systems and increase the amount of natural forest land available for sustainable management of natural resources. This parcel is within the wildlife corridor of the Florida Ecological Greenways Network. The conservation easement will be monitored by DEP's Office of Environmental Services. The department recommends approval.
All All right, I move to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Hearing no objection, the motion carries.
Item 16 is consideration of an option agreement to acquire a conservation easement over 6,864 acres within the Fish Eating Creek ecosystem Florida Federal Project from Likes Brothers Incorporated for $10,600,000. The subject parcel is 11 miles long and a mile wide and will provide a vast landscape connection to other conservation lands in the area and will ensure protection for watershed and wetlands, as well as a wide range of wildlife. This parcel is within the wildlife corridor of the Florida Ecological Greenways Network as well. This easement will be monitored by DEP's Office of Environmental Services.
What you've been listening to for about the last hour or so has been Florida's governing council. It's an incredibly unique thing in North America. Florida was the only quote unquote state that ever had this. Unlike other states where there is a governor, lieutenant governor, and then you have your House of Representatives, Senate, Supreme Court, Florida has another level of governance, and it's called a governing council. Because for a very long time, Florida was not part of the 13 original colonies. And it didn't take its cue of governance from them. Neither does the only other place that's kind of like this is Louisiana. They have a very different way of looking at law. And so does Florida. I'll let Jennifer, Veterans for Truth, if sometimes she shows up here, do a video on how Louisiana is the only other truly independent entity in North America. So what we've been here really waiting on is a press conference that was slated for 10:45 this morning. Now it looks like the meeting has gone a little bit longer than what they had planned for. This is our ruling council. It is, of course, the governor. Standing next to him to his right is Attorney General Ashley Moody. And then seated to the left is Agricultural Commissioner Nikki Fried. And then seated lower right is Chief Financial Officer Jimmy Petronis. So it's we have a very interesting line of succession. In most states, it mimics the federal government, where you would have the president, the vice president, and then the Speaker of the House, and then all of the different appointees. Whereas in Florida, you have the governor, the lieutenant governor, and then you go to the ruling council and whoever the senior members of the ruling council. I do believe the order of succession would be, of course, DeSantis, and then Nunez, lieutenant governor, and then Ashley Moody, I believe, would be third in line, and then Jimmy Petronis, Chief Financial Officer, and then Nikki Fried, and then you would go to Speaker of the House, and then down there. I don't think a state has ever had to go through 6 deep into the line of succession for any reason, so I think at that point there would probably be different elections held, that type of thing. So just wanted to cover this today and show how Florida is incredibly unique and how we have the ability to govern ourselves in a way that other states don't. And it's really more about our ability to deal internationally and operate on an international stage. Earlier, before we actually went live with this, there was a commissioner of insurance that was speaking. Florida, believe it or not, Florida is the 9th largest insurance district in the world. Believe it or not. In the world, Florida is the 9th largest, meaning amount of property value that is insured. 9th largest in the world. So the whole idea of the people talking in the comments about, oh, Joe Biden can do this or the U.S. military could. If you knew how much of the U.S. military was actually controlled by Florida, you would be shocked. We have Southcom, We have the command of the entire southern hemisphere in this side in the western hemisphere. We have SOCOM. We have Special Operations Command. We have two other major command headquarters here, I believe Air Force and not Navy, Coast Guard. We have the primary access to space. We have the most busy and active spaceport that we control within our borders. We have so many military folks here. It's unbelievable. I don't think Joe Biden, I don't think any president, any leader could muster enough forces, enough people that would violate posse comitatus to enter Florida for any reason. If there was some issue, some confrontation between DeSantis and Biden, Biden doesn't have the political clout. It just wouldn't happen. I mean, it would be an illegal order. And there wouldn't be a single military officer that would be under any compunction to follow the order, because of posse. It's an illegal order. So we can pretty much do what we want as per the Constitution. That's why it's read that way. And even Joe Biden himself has stated this multiple times, because people have approached him about, well, why can't you force Florida to do this, or why can't you force Florida to do that? Exactly right. And we know, and he's even said it in so many words. His hands are tied. He doesn't want this getting out, that the states have this level of power. If they would just take it for themselves. This is kind of the hard thing, the cringe thing for Floridians when we watch other states talk about freedom and independence, liberty, and all this kind of stuff, but then do nothing. But then do absolutely nothing to follow up with it. You see, every state, this is a channel dedicated just for the people of Florida that we have to watch the business of our government for free and keep account to it. Every state in the union could do this. Tennessee could do this. Texas could do this. Arizona could do this. Missouri could do this. It's not a difficult thing to do, especially in the age of technology that we live in. Civics 101, exactly right. And you could set up your own ruling boards and ruling councils. Ashley Moody is one of the finest. Honestly, people talk about, and I wanted to clear something up, by the way. When people have said, Florida Maquis, what is Florida going to do when Governor DeSantis is term limited? The only limits on terms in Florida are consecutive terms, meaning that if the Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, he's in his first term, if he was reelected to a second term, he would then have to sit out one term, and then he could be reelected again. In Florida, you're not just limited to 2 terms, you're only limited to 2 terms consecutively, meaning that he could step down for 3, and it's a 3-year term, by the way, 2 3-year terms, and then he would have to sit out, let the lieutenant governor become governor, and then he could return and do 6 more years. So I just wanted to make that very clear. It's very different in Florida, whereas at the federal level, you only get 2 4-year terms. In Florida, the governor is elected to 3-year terms. He can only do 2 consecutively, and then he has to sit out, he or she, sit out, and then return. Ashley Moody would be a fantastic governor. She's our Attorney General. Jimmy Patronis would be another fantastic choice for governor, our CFO. He could step in for that 3-year period. DeSantis could return and do 6 more after that. And then sit out another. He could do it for the rest of his life if he wanted to. There just has to be a break. There has to be, every 2 terms, there has to be someone else. And believe me, we have a huge stable of people. We have Blazing Golia. We have Wilton Simpson. I mean, we have all sorts of people that could step in. We have Greg Steube. Greg Steube's in Washington, D.C. right now. We have Byron Donalds. A lot of people know Byron Donalds. He was the one that he's a person of color, and he came out and made the statement that he's in a marriage to a girl that's I believe of Spanish descent, and they have 3 kids. And he was talking to people about BLM, and he's like, about critical race theory. He's like, how am I going to tell my kids that their mother is my oppressor because she's not a person of color? It's just, So anyway, I just wanted to share this with you, and there was going to be a press conference, and it looks like they might be starting to wrap up here. I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, Florida is actually in governance, in proper constitutional governance, putting on a clinic, an absolute clinic. I know there's a lot of people who think that Florida is someplace where we oppress the poor and the downtrodden. Look, there are a lot of people that come to Florida that think they're smarter than the cops. There are a lot of people that think, oh my gosh, I've goofed up here in whatever state I live in up in the north. I'm going to go run to Florida because Florida is where you get away with everything. And I'm so much smarter than their cops are. And because I've seen all the Florida man memes, I'm way better than them. So I'm going to come down there and I'm going to, try to be sneaky. Whether it's drinking and driving, whether it's drugs, whether it's dealing this, that, or the other, or anything else that's illegal. Our cops are the best. And I will say this about Florida. If you come down here and you get crossways with the law, you might as well leave. Because Florida is not one of these places that's very forgiving that way. You won't get any real job. You'll have an incredibly hard time finding a place to either rent or live if you have any kind of a criminal record at all. You'll be definitely living in the underground, which in Florida is pretty seedy, pretty seamy, and not so nice. That's funny. It's somebody say Florida man never gets away. Yeah, that's why do you think he's on the headlines all the time? Because our cops down here are pretty high speed. They're locking up the people down in spring break. Left and right. They tried this same bullcrap they tried last year with spring break, and they showed up from up north, and we just had paddy wagon after paddy wagon after paddy wagon all set to cuff them and stuff them. And that's what's been going on. They've been trying to act like fools, and Florida makes money off of arresting people. It's the second biggest financial driver. Number 1, of course, is tourism in Florida. We make the most money off of tourists, but the number 2 financial driver in the state of Florida, prisons. Prisons and money made from criminals and fees and fines and all that kind of stuff. So it's a wonderful deterrent. It truly is. You'll be broke forever. They will keep you broke forever. You get crossways with the law down here. So, you can do things the way California does them and you can see the results. Or you can do things the way Florida. Yeah, exactly right. And most times Florida man has been here for maybe 6 months, maybe a year and a half. And then, of course, because technically he's a Florida resident at that point, he's Florida man, but they're not natives. They're not natives. So anyway, once again, this is a Board of Trustees of the Internal Improvement Trust Fund, Aquaculture Lease. Basically what you're looking at here is the people in Florida, the commissioners in Florida that are in charge of being financially responsible. What they're doing right here is they're going before the governing board and saying, governing board, you have entrusted us with XYZ money, and this is what we want to do with it. We've consulted the experts, and here are the list of things that we think would be the best way to spend our money. And then the governing board can say, approve or not approve. And so this is yet another level of accountability for Florida finances. Well, you see, it's not the same thing, Cobra. It's contrary to popular opinion, the governor does not rule alone. So there's no equivalent of the governor of Florida is really not the equivalent of a president or a prime minister. He is the chief of a board. And it's a board of 4. That includes the attorney general, the commissioner of agriculture, and the chief financial officer. Now, in certain ministerial roles, he does appear as for example, he's the head of the National Guard. And as you can see, there's the board right there. What you're looking at right here is the board. That's Nikki Fried all the way to the right. She's the Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services. In fact, she is the one that hands out the concealed carry licenses. I have a concealed carry license, and her signature is on it. And you'll see, so there's a whole group of people that are part of different aspects of governance. The Attorney General, the legal aspect. The Chief Financial Officer, of course, the financial aspect. And then, of course, we have the governor, the administrative aspect. And then here we have the agricultural aspect. So this is I'm not sure. It looks like this is Florida Park Services. I believe that's who we're looking at here. And once again, they're giving accountability for conservation easement, Okeechobee County. Okay. So this is what we're watching. And I've talked for a long time about Florida being its own independent entity, being its own self-righting ship, so to speak. That regardless of what D.C. does, Florida will maintain true north, so to speak. Well, exactly right, Rich, that they're all getting along. You see, get rid of Twitter. Get rid of Twitter and get rid of everything that you see on, as far as all the political machinations. The reason, and I will say this again about anybody talking about constitutional carry, there's no constitutional, what they call constitutional carry is unconstitutional. Do you know why? Anybody talking about constitutional carry, it's unconstitutional. And it's directly in the reading of the Second Amendment. Thanks, Gate Smasher. Appreciate you being here. The reason it's unconstitutional is this. The Second Amendment begins by saying a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. If the government, somebody would pass a law saying that there is no requirement for carrying a weapon, what that does is it takes the ability of the government to regulate the militia out of their own hands. They can't legislate away their duty to regulate the militia. Period. What that would mean is that you couldn't say prisoners can't have guns. You couldn't say minors can't have guns. Because there's nothing in the Constitution that talks about age or criminal background. So regulating the militia is the duty. It's the duty of the state to regulate the militia. Right. And so when there's a duty to regulate the militia, it would be like telling the Army, okay, Army, you can't have standards. You can't have BRM standards. You need to, first day that they sign up for the military, you hand them as much ammunition and as many weapons as they ask for because you can't regulate that. Would that make any sense? First day, right off the bus, you just, hand over, okay, how many grenades do you want, trainee? Do you want an M60? Do you want an M247? What do you want? What do you want? An AR-15? Do you want a SKS? Do you want to import you a foreign weapon? Because we can't regulate, we can't say what you can and can't carry. But by law, constitutional carry says we can't involve ourselves in what you can and can't have. See, that's why what they call constitutional carry is truly unconstitutional. It is the job and the duty. It is the job and the duty of the government to regulate the militia. Because it says a well-regulated militia being necessary. So I don't want to hear it about constitutional carry. We have concealed weapons permits for a reason, and they work. There are plenty of people out there that have no business, including prisoners and felons, and I guess you could say illegal aliens too. They have no business having guns. Because if you decided to pass that Chaz, exactly right. Rich Spillman just said, think of Chaz. Think of something like this where they could just say, okay, well, anybody can have any amount of weapons, whatever. They could just decide to go in and take over an entire, well, we can't take away their guns because constitutional carry says that there's no way that government has the ability to seize any weapons under any circumstances. So all prisoners can have guns, all illegals can have guns, all minors can have guns, all mentally ill people can have guns. Does that make any sense to anyone within the sound of my voice? Right. So anybody, anywhere talking about constitutional carry needs to go zip it. So. Well, thank you for your service, Mama Sari. Very much appreciate it. Let's see, who is this? I think this is the VA. Yeah, this is a Major General James Hartzell, retired. Department of Veterans Affairs. What about the overreach of the ATF? When you have a regulatory agency, everybody's going to have examples of their opinion of perhaps over-regulation. I'm sure everybody who got a speeding ticket, oh, I wasn't speeding, or everybody else was speeding too. Everybody else, they just picked on me. They just picked on poor little me, big boss. Sometimes, and Florida's this way too. Look, I've gotten speeding tickets. I've gotten even the red light tickets. It sucks having to write the check. I hate it. It took forever to get my concealed carry down here. It took for flipping ever. And I'm former military. I even went and took the class and I didn't have to. Just for an overabundance of caution. It took months, but, I would rather that be the case than any old random whatever, just being able to say, well, government can't regulate me. I mean, people talk about when, like, who remembers when the guy drove his car through the parade last year? Trying to remember where it was. It was up in the Midwest somewhere. Do we or do we not regulate cars? Okay, you see, Waco situations, well, perhaps that's something more for Texas. Texas should have stopped Waco before the feds got involved. I fault Texas for Waco. Texas should have stepped in long before the feds got involved and dealt with their own problem. Oh, you see right there, Gina Burlingham. Legal patriotic citizens, really legal citizens, in so-called blue states, you mean where you've lost elections, deserve, meaning you're entitled to. Anytime you see the word deserve, are entitled to be freed from the tyranny leave, Gina. You're not entitled to anything. Leave. If it's that bad, leave. I did. I haven't always lived in Florida. I've said it before. If staying in Florida meant me living in my car at a campground, I would live in my car at a campground. Praise God every day. Praise God every day that I have a home here. And I'm not going to do anything to muck with that. Oh, no, it doesn't, Blue Sky. Regulated did not have a different meaning. A well-regulated, well-trained, well-organized, that's what that meant. Well-regulated meant well-trained and well-organized. That's not true, Robert. That's a total lie. And if you can prove it, please sue her. Okay, if you're living in a blue state, that means you lost elections. Vote with your feet, vote with your money. Give over the land we loved. Okay, look, if it's about land, it's not about land. Well, that's the thing. Regulated by whom? Regulated in Florida by the government of Florida. We have our own constitution. And like I said, you can't take that power, that responsibility away from the government. It's their job. The Second Amendment isn't just an entitlement. This entitlement mentality that the government needs to do this, 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 and this, and this, and this. That isn't how it works. I mean, anybody talking, and I'll go back to this. If you're talking about constitutional carry, who are you going to say for sure doesn't get weapons? Who are you going to say? Are you going to literally, because constitutional carry means no checking of any kind of a background that anybody can go in and get a weapon. Do you really want just any old buddy, any person who just desires one, what's for under any reason? Exactly right. Do what you can do. Look, Florida hasn't always been this conservative. It's moved a lot more conservative in the last 20 to 25 years, but that's taken a lot of work. That's taken a great deal of work. Right. You believe in the law. If you believe in the law, Gina, if you believe in the law, then you have to necessarily believe that somebody's going to have to write those laws. Somebody's going to have to enforce them. And guess what? Sometimes human beings don't do it perfectly all the time. Well, guess what? If you believe in God's law, then what does God say about obeying those appointed over you? This whole experiment of government by the people, for the people, and of the people hasn't been the case of history. Has not been the case of history. There have been primarily kings and queens. And the command from the Bible was obey. God is in charge of all, and God sees all. We have this luxury in this country of voting. And truly, it's a luxury. But what you'll find is that you can have as corrupt a president that was voted for as corrupt a king who said, I'm entitled to rule by divine right. Corruption can come to either one. You can have an entire body of men, hundreds of men elected, and they can be corrupt. So if it's 100 corrupt men or one corrupt man, what's the difference? This is why governance at the lowest level is always the key. Checks and balances. God doesn't say stop others from getting an item they want. Okay. So anybody should be able to go get anything they want under any circumstances at all. Aaron. So there should be no laws saying if you want it, you should just be able to go get it. Some government is corrupt, some is not. Okay, you believe everyone should have firearms education prior to ownership. Okay, there's a lot of gang members out there, Adam, that have a lot of firearms education. They've learned it on the street, and they know how to load and unload and shoot all sorts of weapons. And they shouldn't be allowed to have them. You know, I'm not going to get into the whole, if anybody bringing up the V, we're not talking about the V. Well, I guess, Big Boss, whatever your disagreement is, you would then, there's only two things that you can believe. That illegal aliens and criminals and thugs and all sorts of horrible people should be able to have as many guns and grenades and bombs as they want with no government interference, or you believe that there should be some type of regulation. So, okay, so they've just adjourned. And I believe they're going to have a press conference coming up here shortly. So when that returns, we are going to try to cover that. So stay tuned, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and end this live. And then we will be right back with the governor and press conference based on everything that we just talked about. So we'll see how the press can deal with this. Anyway, God bless. Thank you so much for hanging out, and we'll see you guys in just a little bit. Don't go anywhere.
Recommendations.
I would also reject that as well. Conversations happen in a lot of different places.
Did the governor's office, I was told that the governor's office did put pressure on your office not to speak out publicly on this. Is that true?
That is categorically false.
How urgent is it in your mind for the legislature to take some kind of action related to property insurance?
I think all of us in the policymaking realm, the legislature and our agency, need to be working around the clock to address the issues that are challenging Florida's insurance consumers right now. So we'll continue to work with the legislature. We did this past session. We'll continue to next session to work for solutions that bring, first of all, premium relief for consumers, but also stabilization for our marketplace.
Sorry, this is already asked, but what's the name of the new company that's taking on all the 147 months?
Slide.
Is it Slide Property Insurance, or is that just
Slide Blade?
Slide Company?
Slide Insurance Company.
In regards to what you said there and everything like that, I want to make sure I understand something. So there was the Senate legislation, which now the governor says he supports. This is the first time that he said that. In regards to, you said you all were taking some steps. So what's different between what you can do administratively related to roofs versus what was being proposed in the law? I'm trying to understand, in other words, is the language that was even in the bill in the Senate, is it actually needed, or can you approve new forms? Because you mentioned deductibles and changing the value.
Right.
And I know there were some consumer protections in the law about making sure consumers understood that they weren't going to get a full roof anymore.
Yeah, so the biggest difference is that we can approve forms that do what the Senate bill does. The biggest difference, and the reason why the legislation was proposed, is that consumers have to proactively choose that. So the statute requires me to offer you a all other peril roof deductible, right? So I have to offer you that, okay? If you want your choice, you can take this roof deductible, okay? What the legislation would have done, and the reason why those make sure the consumer knows does, is I can, under that law, I can go to you and say, you have a roof deductible. It's very much more similar to the hurricane deductible, where you just get the roof deductible. So there'd be a lot of opportunities for you to talk to your agent to make sure that they understood that. that you might have some higher costs out of pocket if you replace your roof and filed an insurance claim for that.
But wouldn't it still be optional for the
Under the way the legislation was worded is that companies would no longer have to offer the all other peril deductible for roofs.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so that's the biggest difference.
It sounded like you suggested that litigation was the driving force of the high insurance costs. I mean, not so much roofing, which has been kind of an ongoing narrative. Why are these people why is this litigation occurring? Is it because you've got insurance companies coming into the state that aren't properly vetted, that shouldn't be doing business here, and that are going out of business?
So first of all, no on that last part.
Okay.
So you have a roof issue, right? So roof claims are what's driving costs, right? So the question is, well, how come it's roof claims? What is it about roofs that caused them to be? So we didn't have roof claims 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, you had roof claims, but not to the extent that we're seeing now. So when you start to peel back the onion about how did we get this influx of roof claims, well, it coincides with legislation that was effective in closing our assignment of benefits loopholes, right? And so you can go all the way back to mold claims. Once you put a $10,000 cap on mold claims, suddenly nobody had a mold claim anymore. Now they had sinkhole claims. And once you put a definition of catastrophic ground cover collapse in, now nobody had those kinds of claims anymore. Now they've got water claims. And so we move from issue to issue, and the one consistent theme in all of those issues is an excessive amount of litigation in our state. The governor just mentioned a statistic that we put out. 76% of all of the country's litigation in the homeowners insurance space happens in Florida.
But you also mentioned reinsurance, and as we know, reinsurance has always continued to be an ongoing cost driver for the domestic carriers. And you had mentioned that you want to see what happens over the next couple of months as they place coverage. Are you all prepared to make any changes in regards to the CAT fund and the retention rate and things of that nature related to ease maybe the pressure that these companies have regarding reinsurance?
So that would have to happen legislatively. So we
I
can't
understand that, but I'm asking
do
if
that.
you want to make any recommendations on that front.
So at this point, I have a lot of unanswered questions about the long-term impacts of lowering the retention of the CAT fund, and those haven't been answered yet. And so we'll continue to be open-minded about those kinds of ideas, but we have some questions about that.
I assume though you are tracking it, and it is the case that reinsurance rates have been trending up over the last several years.
Yes.
Okay.
And those are all related to market conditions right now. So I mentioned a statistic just a moment ago that because of the activity that we've described this morning, the reinsurance community basically paid for Hurricane Irma 3 times, according to one reinsurer, right? So if you're in a business where you pay for those kinds of losses and you have that kind of experience, I mean, you'd have almost no choice but to raise the amount of cost for your reinsurance product. It's just like with any other business. If it costs more to build an auto car, you're going to charge more for that.
Unless, of course, you lower the retention rate of the CAT and allow people to access it at a lower rate. As we know, the CAT fund is fully capitalized right now.
Potentially, but then what you're doing is you're lowering the exposure point of the CAT fund, which could be fine. I don't know how the bond markets will react to that, for example. So the CAT fund, as you know, they issue pre-event, post-event bonds for that funding. Not sure how the bond markets will react if suddenly their exposure is $4 billion lower than it used to be.
But I think we'd agree that with inflationary pressures increasing the interest rates, bonds would actually probably become a more attractive investment in the near future.
See, I don't know that. So I don't know. And that's the challenge, is that that's a significant shift in public policy, and before we agree to recommend that to anybody, we would need to have some more thorough conversations with proponents to make sure we understand that.
All the solutions that are being talked about, are solutions that make it more expensive. I mean, none of this relieves the pressure on homeowners right now who are paying, either finding it impossible to find property insurance because they have older roofs, or who are paying, more than their mortgage in some cases for their insurance premium. Are there any solutions out there that would reduce rates for homeowners?
Well, I think the problem is that the rate experience that we're seeing is a result of several years of activity in the roofing space. And, once you have that kind of loss experience, it becomes very difficult to just flip a switch and reverse all of that overnight. The reforms that we're talking about, the reforms we've enacted in Senate Bill 76 and House Bill 7065, I think those are ultimately going to be effective in lowering costs for consumers. But none of this happens overnight, unfortunately. I wish that it would, but it just doesn't. And so we're going to have to continue to stay diligent in monitoring the impact of those reforms that we've done, and keeping all options on the table as we continue to work through this.
How big of a drop in litigation would it take to lower rates? And then also, I mean, that seems to be the crux of the argument always in here, to your point about going from issue to issue to issue in cottage industry that bubbles up after one issue is addressed in the legislature. Is there a way to address the the litigation issue without closing off the availability of a consumer to go to file lawsuits for a legitimate, if they're legitimately aggrieved. Sorry.
I'm not sure I followed the whole question. Do you mind to?
On the second one was, is there a way to reduce the litigation costs without closing off the access to the courts?
Well, yeah, that's ultimately the goal. And one of the things about Senate Bill 76 and House Bill 7065 before that is that while we dealt with the one-way attorney fee statute, we didn't eliminate it. And so what we essentially tried to do was incentivize people to bring good lawsuits. If you've got an actual legitimate lawsuit, bring that on. I'm a big proponent of if an insurance company does something stupid, they should get sued for it. But that's not really what we're seeing. We're seeing Barry Gilway get a claim at 10 o'clock in the morning and a lawsuit at 10:15 in the morning, where he has no opportunity whatsoever to adjudicate that claim in any reasonable way before he's suddenly facing a lawsuit. The other challenging part about it is that once you get the lawsuit, the company can't talk to their consumer because now they're represented by an attorney. And so consumers oftentimes don't even know that this has happened. And so they get frustrated that their insurance company won't talk to them. And now we're off to the races with this. In terms of how much we need to reduce litigation by in order to see some rate benefit, I don't know the answer to that question. One CEO was somewhere and made a comment that if we could reduce litigation by 2% in our state, that could make a potentially meaningful difference. So we're going to continue to work on this very hard and see what we can do.
Going back to session, what seemed to be the problem, the breakdown in terms of getting anything passed from what you understand?
I just think there was a difference of opinion between the Senate and with the House. I think the House was in a position where they wanted to see the impacts of Senate Bill 76 before they moved forward with some of the things the Senate wanted to do. I think the House wanted to see the insurance industry attempt to implement some of these deductibles and things of that nature on an optional basis first before they mandated that everybody do it. I think there was a good faith effort by both chambers to make some reforms here, and I just think at the end of the day it was a difference of opinion.
Do you think the crisis is big enough that special session is needed, that lawmakers need to come back sooner rather than later?
I just think we all need to stay diligent and keep working very hard on this issue for our consumers.
All right, guys,
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
You are watching the Florida Channel.
If you like the Florida Channel, now